information to try and manipulate different people to do different things. 70%. The levels of trust are so low. And that is sad, right? It's sad that we live in a culture that is that untrusting. But maybe it's also not much of a surprise. The last 10 years you could call the decade of alternative facts, couldn't you? The term post-culture that we're in, the sort of a post-truth society, was actually coined back in 1992, before, like, most of you were born, right? When I was 9, back in 1992. But in 2015, 2016, when a certain political change happened across the other side of the Atlantic, the use of that term, post-truth, went up 2,000%. And it has never come down. We live in a society which is supposed to be post-truth, after truth. Truth is now a thing which is somehow we can't grasp hold of. But it's not just in politics. Just a few years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, Prince Harry published his memoir, Spare, which a quote from which will come up on the screen. He was writing his memoir, he called it Spare, and there was a controversy over whether or not some of the things he wrote were actually true, whether they'd actually happened. And this was his response. He wrote, "Whatever the cause, my memory is my memory. It does what it does, gathers and curates as it sees fit, and there's just as much truth in what I remember and how I remember it as there is in so-called objective facts." And we might kind of turn our nose up at that and think that seems a bit silly, but actually Harry is capturing something of a trend in our society that says truth, it's sort of more than just objective facts. Truth is kind of what we make it, this sense of somehow our truth, the truth that I can own, that I can say is my truth, consists of more than just objectivity. It consists of my interpretation of things, how I felt about things. But that introduces an inescapable tension. On the one hand, we are certain that certain types of certainty are dangerous. We're absolutely certain of that. And we fear to trust fake news. And yet at the same time, we have this longing, this desire for answers that we can construct into knowledge, that we can construct into meaning, which means we can live our lives. And the result is, we know that truth is needed, but trying to come to truth feels a little bit like we're kind of judging on a cosmic level to try and understand what is true and to try and construct our own meaning. In such a culture and such an idea, is certainty even possible about anything? Well, a lot of people would say, well, yes, but perhaps we need to reduce the field of certainty. What we need to do is reduce it down into just the things that we can touch and see. Then we can say what we're certain about. And a figure, someone who would have once said that would be somebody like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who back in 2006, she grew up in an Islamic society. Back in 2006, she announced in her memoir that she was renouncing her religion and becoming atheist. And she was one of the people who was writing most loudly about atheism at the time, back in 2006. And she simply said this: there is nothing more than what I can see and touch, she meant. And I want nothing more. I need nothing more. The question is, though, if that's the case, if all we can be certain about is what we see and what we touch, what happens to our efforts to try and build meaning that we can live our lives by? In the end, inevitably, we lack the material. We lack the building material to be able to do that effectively. Summed up by Alex Rosenberg, philosopher and author, who said this: what's the meaning of the universe and of life? There is none. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. In other words, where we're left is, if it's only what we can see and touch, we either have to ignore the desire to build meaning or pretend that we can anyway and just get on with things. But here's the question. Does that work? Does ignoring the desire to build meaning, the thirst for meaning in every human, or pretending that we can even when we don't have the material to do so, does it work? In any other sphere, the needs and longings that we have reveal the kind of creatures we are. If I'm feeling thirsty, it suggests that I'm the kind of creature that's designed to drink water, and that even if I might not find it because I'm in the middle of a desert, that water does exist in the world that I've been designed for. And so, if our thirst for meaning is so big, could it suggest that reality itself is actually meaningful? The reality that I've been designed for? And that question, if you let it, will niggle at you. Could it be possible that the reality I'm made for is meaningful, given that I have a thirst for meaning within me? And so much so will it niggle at you that it's been niggling at countless people in our culture and in our society, in the UK society, over the last few years. The number of people who have publicly come and said, okay, I used to think meaning was either not there at all, or the only thing I could be certain about was what I taste and touch and see. But now I'm turning away from that and saying that meaning and truth has to be something more. And one example of someone who has said that in the last couple of years, you've already seen her, is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who 20 years ago would have said, no, I'm an atheist, I do not need anything more, there is nothing more, I want nothing more, but back in 2023, wrote an essay explaining why she had become a Christian, and said simply this: atheism, in her experience, had failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and the purpose of life? And so we end up living in a world, if we try and base all our meaning and all our purpose on just what we can taste and what we can touch and what we can see, say that's the only thing we can be certain about, we end up living in a world that is somewhat haunted by the idea, eloquently expressed by the author Julian Barnes: I don't believe in God, but I miss him. There is something in me that yearns for something more, that I can't construct from just what I can taste and what I can touch and what I can see. So here's the question for tonight, the question that's driving this evening. The question is, where does that desire for truth in that sense come from? Where does that desire in us, in human beings, for a meaning that can order our lives come from? And more perhaps pertinently, how do we navigate the tension between our sense that we need to doubt some things and our desire to be able to be certain about what is true and how we live? How do we navigate that tension? As I said, this week, one of the big things that the Christian Union wants to do is to give everybody the opportunity to think about these things. And that doesn't mean just sitting here and listening to some person talking about these things. It also means talking about them ourselves. And so every evening, what we're going to do is we're going to give you, around the tables that you're in, the opportunity to discuss some of these things as we go. So we're going to pause at a few different intervals through each evening, and the first time is now. And there'll be some questions which will come up on the screen, just like that, and they're also on some bits of paper around your table in case you can't see the screen, for you to be able to just ask around the table, to discuss around the table. Now, it might be that something I have already said tonight has already triggered a question in your head, or even just the response, well, this is all rubbish, I don't believe any of this. That's absolutely fine. I'm not offended by that whatsoever. If you want to turn to the person next to you at this point and go, well, I didn't agree with what he was saying just there, or that was all rubbish, then that's absolutely fine. Just be prepared for the person next to you to ask, oh, that's interesting, why? So that you can actually talk about it. Just be prepared for that. Absolutely fine if that's what you'd like to talk about. But if you need some help, here are a couple of questions. Why do you think we value truth and meaning so highly as a species? Why do you think we value it? I've given you some thoughts, but why do you think we value it so highly? And then where and how does doubt find a place in your life? We're going to give you a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, to discuss these questions around your tables. Don't be shy, start chatting, and then we'll come back again shortly. sublime at the
I
moment,
am.
you were telling me.
I hate it.
Which, it's not as sublime as all that. Is that what
No,
you're saying?
I mean, technically it is because, sorry, no, I was going to get into what sublime actually is, but it's technically sublime
Technically, just not feeling
in a terrible way,
Yeah,
which is the point.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe that's another evening, another discussion.
Oh, yeah.
But we'd love to hear a little bit about your story of, you're part of the Christian Union now, your story of how that came about. And you grew up, you were telling me earlier, in a family where Christianity was in the air, was around. What was your view of God as you were growing up?
Yeah, when I was really young, my mum was very much the woman of God in the house. And so I think a lot of my view about Christianity came from her, and I really saw her as like this super holy person. One of my earliest memories was her talking to me about the fear of God, and it was like out of the Proverbs, is that Proverbs? Yeah, it is. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I was like, Mum, what does it mean to like fear God? Like, why should I be scared of him? And she was just like, you'll understand with time, as parents tend to do. But it was like one of those things that I like think about growing up. And my mum had a lot of zeal for God as well. She was really, really passionate. Last person at the prayer meeting, first person to arrive at every church thing. But I also grew up in an abusive home. And so it was really hard for me to reconcile the notions around me about who God was, and the concept that he's meant to be like for us, and he's supposed to be, even calling God Father was like odd, given the reality of my like experience as a kid. And so Christianity growing up, I think, because of my mum's like faith, I also like she'd always tell us what was going on as well. So there'd be things that she's praying through, and she's like, "Oh, we have this problem, but I'm praying about it." And then a few months later, she's like, "God answered the prayer," and so that would like really witness to me, and it'd be like, "Okay, yeah, so there is a God." So I always believed in God. I just didn't believe that God had time for me, or that God bothered about me. Because I think one of the big things was the idea that, children are to obey their parents. And I was like, well, if my dad told me to jump off a cliff, do I have to do it? Because you have to obey your parents. And so I was very much in the posture of looking at God as someone who was against me, and as someone who loved me philosophically, as in like, there's God's omnipresence and there's his omnipotency, and there was this like omni-love that I also believed in, where it's like, it's real, but it's not really real. It's just a thing people say.
So sort of lack of personality in it, or personal nature in relationship with you. And now, of course, you'd say, joyfully, you're part of the Christian Union and you're a Christian. And you were telling me earlier that that there were some pretty dark times, but then around about GCSEs time, the skies really began to clear. Tell us more about that. What brought you to that point?
Yeah, so, I mean, growing up was quite fairly tough, and so I developed depression, and it was really bad. I think like I started recognizing that, oh, this might be depression, because I was like listening to 21 Pilots all the time, and I was like only ever in black clothes, and people were like, Hannah, you're emo, and I was like, no, I'm black. But no, it was crazy. But then it lasted, and I think I struggled a lot with really basic things that particularly my sister didn't struggle with, because we shared a room. Like in the morning, she'd like get out of bed and go to shower and then eat breakfast, and I was still in bed because just my body was so heavy, I couldn't physically get out of bed. And there was just a lot of like life was hard to do physically, and I tried to get help, and that was interesting. And I think there was one moment where the depression became anxiety, and I couldn't walk, and that was around GCSEs. It's actually, I think it was because of COVID, because COVID happened. Also, my memory is my memory's like not great at time stamps. So this is all like vague secondary school
I mean,
period.
COVID, I think for all of us probably did that, let alone having
Yeah.
everything else that you were going through.
Yeah.
That time became weird, didn't it? But
Yeah, yeah. But at some time in COVID, I got really bad anxiety, and um, my legs would shake if I tried to stand up, and I would get random tremors in my hands, and so I couldn't write, and I couldn't walk, and I was bedridden for ages. Um, and my mum, obviously, like, her first intuition was to not believe me. And then she started praying, and she was praying and praying and praying really, really hard. And then, like, it was hard to figure out what we're supposed to do in terms of, like, going to the hospital. But finally managed to get an appointment or something. I don't really know what happened, but I was all of a sudden in a wheelchair in ER for ages, waiting to be seen by people. And that was a hard experience because I was like in the hospital bed, and my mum looked at me. And a few years before that, some really like, a few years before that, and also at the time, some very dramatic things had happened with my dad, who at this point was no longer like in the family home. And she looked at me and she was like, Hannah, how long is this going to be a problem? How long are you going to be struggling, basically? Not out of meanness, but I think my mum at that point saw that it had been a long time and I was still not better. And so that was just kind of like how dark things got, but then I could walk like a few weeks later. And I don't know what changed because I still like got tremors in my hands randomly, but I never got them in my legs really to the same extent. And yeah, and so yeah, wait, I forgot what I was talking about. But yeah, that was really hard. And then I don't know, it got worse actually before it got better, before like sky started clearing. Because I then started to, I think, sorry, throughout all of this,
okay.
It's kind of, because like, as I said, I always believed in God. And so there was how I saw God through all of that like emotional turbulence. And I was really struggling with some sin in my life at the time. And I think I approached God to kind of like barter for my forgiveness and to ask him to help me with things. And that's also how I approached. I knew about the armor of God, right? And so it's like, I need to read my Bible so I have a sword, so I can like
so you
fight.
can protect yourself and
So I
fight
can
against
protect
whatever
myself
this is.
against
Right.
like my mental health and against bad feelings and all these things. But like reading the Bible was really hard, and I really couldn't do it. And it was crazy because I'd read really hard books. I'd read Dopamine and Son by Charles Dickens. It's awful, don't read it. I've read Journey to the West. I tried the Iliad, but I couldn't read Genesis chapter 1. And I don't know why. It was crazy because I'd either fall asleep or get bored, and I couldn't do a verse a day. And I just felt myself getting worse and worse and worse. I would just like to say, like, I think I was telling you this earlier, that I had a seed planted in me by my mum's like super like faithfulness to God through really hard times, and through her like zeal for him. I kind of saw that. I was like, well, God has to be real, but like I don't know what that means for me. And tangential to all of this, I wanted to die, and so one day I'd planned it for like a while in my head, and I figured out how I was going to do it. I figured out the day I was going to do it, like for the least convenience and maximum success, which sounds odd actually. Never mind. But anyway, I was going to go ahead with it, and I think the moment I don't want to like describe what I was doing. Sorry, because that's not
okay.
helpful. But the point is, I felt like I shouldn't, right? And I felt a resistance to it. And I believe that I heard God say, not externally, and not like an internal thought, but just kind of like a sense of knowing that I haven't ever really given Christianity a really good try. Before I give up on everything in my life, I thought I should at least try to be a really good Christian for like a year, because like this is supposed to be the thing, right? That everyone, I did RS. And again, my mother and other Christians that I knew, I was like, well, let me try it really well. And so that year I actually had my GCSEs, so I actually ended up mostly revising. I tried to read a verse a day. I failed to do that. But I think all of that was just kind of like adding up bit by bit. And I didn't realize it because I just felt like I was failing and I couldn't do anything right. And so, yeah, that was happening. And then my mom was like taking me to all these different church things in like London. And I started searching up sermons on YouTube. And a lot of people were talking about First John.
So a book in the Bible.
A book in the Bible.
Yeah.
First John. And one day, after my GCSEs, it was summer, I was really bored because I'd been looking after my baby sister all day. And she was asleep. And my mum is a nurse. This was like 2022. My mum was a nurse. And she hadn't come back from work yet. So I just sat there, really, really bored. And I was like, wow, I'm so bored. Since I can't get any more bored, I might as well read the Bible. Because at that point, like, it was just incredibly boring for me and I couldn't do it. So I decided to open to the book of First John because I was like, maybe God wants me to read it. And I started reading it. And it was talking about, like, we're telling you about things that we have seen, what we have heard, what we've witnessed. And then it talks about, like, God is light, and in him there is no darkness. God is truth, and in him there is no deceit. We love God because he first loved us. And it was the first time I could read, like, a chapter of the Bible. It was the first time I was, like, excited to turn the page. It was the first time I understood what they were talking about. And that amazed me because I was starting to realize what it meant for who God was, that he was someone totally good. Not powerful and cruel, but totally good. And that goodness actually means kind. And goodness actually means love, right? And so while that was happening, well, before, maybe like in the same week that happened, I would take walks in the morning / evening, either early morning or really late evening. And in those walks, I had my walking playlist. And my walking playlist would like have a bunch of different songs that were vibey. And there was this one song, and it was in Spanish. Oh, well, I've since learned that it was probably Portuguese, actually, because I have a friend who speaks Spanish.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They're close.
Tangent. So it was Señor Te Amo. And I didn't know that meant, God, I just knew that every single time I listened to that song, I would like get really like pumped and excited, and my like breath, it'd be like a runner's high. I think that's a better way to describe it. Earlier I described it like fresh mountain air, but a runner's high is probably closer to what I felt. And I wasn't running at the time, I was walking, but I loved the way that it made me feel. And one day in the early morning, I was listening to that song and I just started like singing it because sometimes I lack situational awareness. And I was like singing it all the way back home. And I lived in a block of flats that were really echoey. And instead of thinking, 7 a.m., let's not wake any of my neighbors up, I was like, it's 7 a.m., no one's here, the echo and the vibes are gonna be great. So I started singing like Señor Te Amo over and over and over and over again. And I felt really, really, really good. And so I searched up what that song meant, because I was like, oh, I love this song so much, I can't not know what the lyrics mean. And it was all about like, God, I love you because you love me, basically. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, maybe there's something with Christian music that's just like really nice, actually. And so I started listening to more Christian music, like artists like John Lucas, and there was this people on Spotify, Verses, they sing the Bible. And every time I listened to music like that, I would feel an extreme sense of peace. And that was significant to me, because at this point, I didn't know what it felt like to just be okay and to just be at peace internally. I only knew what it felt like to feel dirty and to hate myself and to feel like I'm letting everyone down, like general negative emotions. But I felt just such overwhelming, like, happiness, euphoria. I actually wrote a poem about this whole experience, because everything felt more colorful and everything felt brighter. And I feel like that was when I really started to think to myself, yeah, like this is where we're at with Christianity. And I could read the Bible, and it was great. Yeah.
Thank you. There's been some hard things to hear there, and I should say, if those things affect anyone here, please do seek out help from the University Counselling Service or from your parents' healthcare professionals. But it's wonderful to hear the story and to hear what God has done to clear those skies, and your encounter with a certainty, what they've seen and heard, and also that personal love. Thank you. Can we give Hannah a round of applause? Say thank you. So Hannah is among millions, billions of people who would attest to a certainty which matters, a certainty which changes things. And as I said, this week, the big question, if you like, that we're thinking through is, in this world of challenges and fake news, in a world of loneliness, in a world of suffering and pain, as we've just heard, does God have an opinion on the world? Does God have an opinion on you and on me? Does he have an opinion on how we best can live? And if he does, how would we know? Because if God speaks, and God is the God that Hannah has just described, who is love, then that is not just good news, that's brilliant news. And in order to try and answer that question, what we're going to do in the evenings this week is spend a bit of time focusing on this book that you've got in front of you, these orange books. I'd love you to grab a copy of it. It should be within arm's length. So if everyone could just grab one of these. What you are holding as you pick one of these up is simply a copy of one of the early accounts of Jesus' life. It's a book called Luke's Gospel. It was written by a first century physician, a doctor, funnily enough, called Luke. And we want to turn to this book to say, yes, God does have an opinion. Yes, it is possible to be certain because of what Luke has said. And some people in the room might immediately go, well, that's ridiculous. What an absolutely ridiculous claim to make, that we could trust Luke. You can't trust Luke that he's saying anything certain. I mean, he talks of angels and miracles and Jesus rising from the dead. How can anybody possibly trust that? He begins with a virgin having a baby. Isn't he self-consciously writing myth? Is that not what's going on here? If that's your reaction to holding this copy of Luke's Gospel, is he self-consciously writing myth? Well, actually, that's not quite fair on Luke and on the process that he went through trying to write this book. So what I'd love you to do is to turn to page 6 of this book, and we're just going to hear Luke's own record of what he was doing as he wrote. He was a clever man. He was a physician, a first century doctor. He was writing in the Roman and Greek world, which is actually far more sophisticated than we sometimes give credit for. And listen to his process on page 6. This is what he writes, how he begins. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. So what's going on there? It turns out Luke is actually writing for a particular person. He's writing for a mate of his called Theophilus, which is a Roman name, which we can be pretty certain, because people weren't 100% imaginative with names in those times, is attached to someone of high rank, likely to be a Roman official, very high rank in their society. He also gets this title, Most Excellent, which again confirms that. Theophilus was a high-ranking Roman official, which means that Theophilus' home, job, family, his entire life, his security was all dependent on his allegiance to the Roman Emperor Caesar and to the Roman gods. But it turns out that somewhere along the line, Theophilus has heard about Jesus. He's heard the claims about Jesus, that he was a miracle worker, that he taught, that he lived, that he died, that he rose again. and he wants to know whether it's true. So for Theophilus, certainty is definitely dangerous. For a man who's supposed to be have his allegiance to the Roman emperor, who is thought to be one of the gods or the son of the gods, and to turn to somebody else and say he is Lord, not Caesar is Lord, that is a dangerous thing. It's literally to stake his life on something. So the question that Theophilus needs to know is, can I trust this? Which might be the question that you might be asking as you hold it in your hands. Can we trust this? And it turns out that Luke, within about 30 years of Jesus' death, painstakingly draws up an orderly account by sifting through the eyewitnesses, interviewing them, looking at the records that have been kept, hearing the stories that have been built up about this man Jesus within 30 years of his death and the claim of his resurrection, and then documented a careful history. So much so that a secular historian examining this once called Luke an historian of the highest rank. That's who this person is. So the question, can we trust it? Well, yes. We can trust what Luke is doing. But actually, that's not the most important question for Theophilus, is it? The most important question for Theophilus is it worth trusting? And to answer that question, what we really need to do is understand what Luke is saying is actually happening in the story of Jesus. And so what I'd love you to do is to turn over the page to page 8, where we find out a little bit more about this story. What does Luke say is actually happening in the story of Jesus? There on page 8, have a little look at little number 26. This is what Luke writes. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." So Dr. Luke, the first century physician, is reporting something that is utterly astonishing, utterly out of this world. It begins normally. Here is a young woman betrothed to be married, living in a little backwater village in first century Judea. But then he claims she gets a visit from an angel. And he then says a string of absolutely outrageous things to her. Let's read on, little number 29. Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. I guess that makes sense. This is an angel. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Do you hear the outrageous claims that this angel is making, that Luke is making, that this angel said? First of all, this virgin, Luke has told us twice that she is a virgin, is going to have a baby. That's big enough in itself. Second, this baby is going to be Son of the Most High. And third, this baby is somehow God's king and going to be God's king forever. And you might think, well, this is ridiculous. And it turns out that Mary lived in the real world too. Because her question is pretty reasonable. Immediately she asks it. Little number 34. "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?" Gabriel, you're an angel. You guys don't have babies. But something you need to know is that virgins like me don't tend to have babies either. So what's going on is basically the question Mary asks. And this is the reply. The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God." In other words, Mary, the only way I can explain how is to do with God's mysterious power. God is at work here. But the most important thing you need to know is why. Why is this happening? Why is this baby going to be born in this way? Did you hear what the angel said? So that the baby to be born will be called the Son of God. The Son of God. And here is the answer to whether this is worth investigating, worth trusting for Theophilus. Because this is Luke's claim. I want you to hear this. This is Luke's claim. This is the claim that is at the heart of Christianity. His claim is that in Jesus, God himself united his nature with our nature. That God himself stepped into this world, the source of life and light and love, stepped into this dark world that we might know him. What does that mean for all of our searches for truth that we're thinking about this evening? Well, think of it this way. Our problem is a little bit like we live inside the equivalent of a locked room. Now, imagine this evening that you don't remember coming in here. You were brought here. Imagine that somehow someone has managed to wipe all of our memories and then lock all the doors and cover up all the windows. We have no memory of life before this room, no knowledge of life outside this room. Now imagine the sort of theories we might start coming up with about whether or not there is anything beyond those doors. Start theorizing about the fact that the doors sound like there might be something beyond. Start theorizing about where the little spiders we start finding in the corners come from. Maybe there's a great giant spider in the sky, and these are the spider emissaries that are coming to tell us something. We start theorizing about what this, the engineers among us would start thinking these are load-bearing pillars. Maybe there's something above us. Maybe there's something below us. We'd have all these theories, but without any knowledge of the outside, how would we know which ones are true? We wouldn't. Until one day there comes a knock at the door, a turn of a key in a lock, and someone walks in. Suddenly all of the guessing games, however well informed they are, stop. Because that person knows what's outside. That person can tell us what being in here means. And that is the claim at the heart of the Christian faith. That the God who created all things stepped into the locked room of this reality that we might know him and know what it means to be in this reality. That means that all the guessing games, however well informed they might be about God and who he is, all our attempts to reach to him, stop. And most supremely, most wonderfully of all, it means that truth is a person. Not a set of facts for us to examine or try to understand, but a person to know and to be known by, to love and to be loved by, which is what Hannah experienced. And all our attempts to build truth for ourselves into meaning, well, at best, they're rendered foolish. At worst, they're rendered arrogant. Because he is the one who doesn't just have the answers, is the answer to that question. Truth says, know me, I am he. In a world of fake news and lack of trust and truth being questioned constantly, this isn't just good news, this is brilliant news. It means it is possible to be certain about God and about the world and about who we are. Not because we find truth, but because truth finds us. And I am aware that those are huge things to say, especially in 2026. Enormous questions might be raised by what I have just said. And you might be having all sorts of reactions inside you. Again, we want to discuss these ideas. And that's why you're sat round tables. That's why we have these opportunities to think, because we think these things are worth discussing. So we're going to pause again for a couple of moments. And it might be that I've just said a lot of stuff, and you want to pick up on something I've said and say, well, that's nonsense. I don't believe that. Fine. Turn to the person next to you, say that, but just be prepared for them to say, oh, that's interesting. Why don't you believe it? And if you're this person next to them, do ask why. It'd be really good to have that conversation. But if you need a bit of help in discussing, we're going to put another couple of questions on the screen. Here they are. What difference might the idea that truth is a person as opposed to a set of facts make to our search for truth and meaning? And secondly, how could someone go about investigating that idea? Give you another 5, maybe even 10 minutes, depending on how well you're going in the conversation, to discuss those things. Do feel free to have a bit of a chat around your tables, and I'll be back in a moment. Well, for the final time this evening, I'm going to break into those conversations. Apologies. Do keep thinking through those things you're talking about, because you can pick them up again just in a few minutes, and then for much longer over food as well in a moment. But just as we begin to come to a close, I do want to acknowledge that certainty, we've been talking about certainty and truth and trust, that certainty in this sort of realm, when you start talking about God, certainty can feel dangerous. It can feel like a dangerous thing to do, to trust something like that with, and to try and put all your weight of certainty on it. But the claim of Christianity, the claims that are at the center of Christianity, is that because the source of certainty is God stepping through that door into the locked room of reality, not us trying to find him, it doesn't need to feel dangerous. Because the source of certainty is God, not us. Certainty doesn't need to feel dangerous in this way. But you might be sitting there thinking, well, surely though, in the end, isn't just kind of remaining skeptical, suspending my judgment, remaining skeptical and saying, well, I don't think it's possible to be certain in that way. I don't think it's good to be certain in that way. Is that not safer? And is it not more humble? Is it not a place where I can keep my mind open? Is that not safer? Well, if you did that, yes, you might avoid believing the wrong thing about God, because you just don't believe anything. It's possible you might avoid believing the wrong thing. But can I say to you, that is not the only way to get it wrong about God. Not believing the wrong thing is not the only kind of error when it comes to certainty. Picture it this way. Imagine you go out on a walk in, I don't know Warwick very well, but I'm sure you have some countryside somewhere nearby. And you go out for a walk in the countryside and you get totally lost, completely lost. And you're spending hours wandering, and your phone signal's died, so you can't even check where you are on your map. You're completely lost. And eventually, you finally reach a small path with a little broken down sign, and it's pointing vaguely down a path towards Warwick. And you think, oh, I'm saved. And then a little voice in the back of your head goes, aha, but is that sign pointing in the right direction? I know that some of my friends they're the kind of people who do this sort of thing, were wandering about and got a little bit lost around this area. What if they've turned the sign around? What if that's pointing me away from Warwick instead of towards Warwick? What then? Perhaps it would be safer not to follow the sign. Perhaps it would be safer to stay where I am, to suspend judgment, because I can't be certain which way Warwick is. It's true that you will avoid going the wrong way, but you will also fall into the other way of getting it wrong, which is to not go the right way. And that is what a lot of people do when it comes to faith in God. Let's suspend all belief, because then I won't get it wrong. But if God has stepped into the locked room of reality, then it's very possible that you won't get it right either. Because certainty comes from him, not from us. Nor, as we think about these things, are we as consistent as we think we are. The psychologist Elliot Aronson sums this up very well when he says, human beings aren't rational animals. We're rationalizing animals who want to appear reasonable to ourselves. In other words, we form rational defenses for what we already kind of want to think. But to reckon with the claim that truth is a person, not just a set of facts, even to be consistently skeptical about that idea, you need to reckon with the person. You need to reckon with the person himself. Which means this week, I want to suggest that the most important question is not, can we trust what Luke says? I and millions of others would say, yes, we can trust what he says. Not even, is it worth trusting what he says? I think that's incontrovertibly yes, because if what he says is true, let me say this, I will say this repeatedly this week. If when you hear the claims of Christianity, you don't think, if this is true, this is the best news in the universe, then you have not understood the claims of Christianity. Is it worth trusting? Yes, it is worth trusting if we can trust it. The big question then really is, will we trust it? Will we trust Luke? Will we allow ourselves to trust Luke? Because that is much more searching. There is more at stake in that question. Because truth as a person means a person who gets to call the shots. A person who is truth, who sets the standards. That's why the angel announces him as king. He is the one who deserves to call the shots. But it is also such good news because, in the words of the author, Tara Isabella Burton, the Christian story is a story not just about the possibility of a world with meaning in it, but a story about a world where the meaning is quite specifically and fully love, because truth is a person. It is a world built upon the love of a creator who built a good world and who, when sin afflicts it, comes into that world in vulnerability and mortality to save it. Love birthed the world. Love restores it. That's what Hannah discovered as she read 1 John. And that's what millions of Christians have discovered as they've investigated the claim that truth is a person, which means that truth is not something just to be known, not even just someone to be known by, but someone to be loved and someone to love. And so that's our invitation this week. If you like, that's Jesus' invitation. It's certainly Luke's invitation from these books. Will you examine that? Will you spend some time looking into that, reckoning with that idea that truth is a person? Will you do it? And perhaps the challenge that Luke has, if it's a challenge, is will you receive it? Will you receive him? We have an opportunity this week to explore what that might mean together. Whether we can trust this, whether this is worth trusting. And so I'd ask you to give all that you need to give to decide if you will trust this week. Come back to our other events. There's events every lunchtime, there's events every afternoon, and then I'll be back every evening this week as we investigate these ideas a little bit more and try and find out what it means that truth is a person and what that could mean. If you'd like to take away some things to think about and read about, we'd love you to take away a copy of Luke's Gospel. Take it away on the proviso that you'll read it and that you'll ask someone to read it with you. That's what these books particularly are designed for, to be read with another person as you go on this investigation together. But you might want to check out the book table over there on my left, on your right, where you'll find all sorts of different books that the Christian Union, it's at the back, sorry, on your right, that the Christian Union be very happy to give to you for free. You can take them away. And I'd highlight one book, which is written by a man called Michael Green, who died a few years ago, and it's called Jesus for Skeptics. If this idea of truth and certainty is the sort of idea that stirred up thoughts in your mind and in your heart, then this book would be the right book to take away to think a little bit more about that. Jesus for Skeptics, do grab that. They're free on the bookstall. But one thing I would love you all to do right now is to take out your mobile phone, because we're going to put up a QR code, a response form code, or a feedback form code, if you like, on the screen. Guys, sorry, but I know my slides are up there. Brilliant. So if you could take your mobile phones out. If everybody could do this, and just no one feels awkward doing it, it will take you to a feedback form. And the CU would love to hear what you make of events like this, what the CU could do to make them better, to hear your thoughts. And it will take you to a form where you can put down which event you've been in. You can just write Monday evening. And then there's a question that will say, how was the event? And let me suggest that you just write 4 words in that box. If you just want to comment something, you could write, thanks for the food. I know you haven't had it yet, but it's coming any minute now. Thanks for the food. And if you're thinking, oh, I don't know what to make of this, feel free. You can write, this is all rubbish. Those 4 words, this is all rubbish. That's absolutely fine. If you think, I'm going to come back, then write, I will come back. And we'd love to see you. But if you would like to keep exploring these things a little bit more than just this week perhaps, more than just the events you can come back to, then maybe you might want to write one of these 2 things. Either invite me to church. I'd like to find out a little bit more that way. Invite me to church. But it's a bit scary to go into church on your own. So invite me to church or read Luke with me. Invite me to church or read Luke with me. If you've written any of those last 2, invite me to church or read Luke with me, can you tick the yes box at the bottom when it says if you'd like to find out more, and then you'll be able to fill in your details and someone from the Christian Union will be able to be in touch to be able to do those things, to invite you to church or to read Luke with you. There is loads and loads to discuss here. And we're going to have loads of time to do that because we've got a bit more time right now for one more discussion around your tables, and then there'll be food and you can keep on talking. If you would like to come and chat with me about any of these things, I'm going to be over by the bookstore. I would be delighted to chat with you. But for the moment, here's a couple more things that you might want to talk about, a couple more questions that will hopefully come up on the screen. Sorry guys, they're at the end of my slides. They're on the paper at the end of around your table too. Two questions you might want to help, just keep on discussing. What questions, do you need to ask to understand the claims about Jesus in an informed way? What questions do you need to ask to understand the claims about Jesus in an informed way? And then if you came along with someone, or you know that someone on your table is a member of the Christian Union, is a Christian, you might, if you feel brave enough, you could ask this question to them. Ask a Christian friend how their search for truth and meaning has changed as they followed Jesus. As I say, you might have loads of other questions in your head. You don't have to stick to those. There might be stuff I've said. You still want to talk about what you've disagreed with. Turn to the person next to you, say, I didn't agree with that. Person next to you will ask why. That's enough from me for the evening. Thanks so much for listening. Do come back for the rest of the week, and our hosts will give you instructions about food in a moment. But just for the next 5 minutes or so, another opportunity to discuss those questions.